Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Plot armor is a powerful thing because it allows authors to create exciting stories full of danger and incredible odds to overcome. I mean, who wants to watch a movie about Steve, the Death Star reactor tech, and his struggles to get management to put in a safety rail near his station so he doesn't fall into the giant death laser? I would. I would totally watch that. And that's because I'm curious about how these dudes don't die from gamma radiation poisoning. That could be season 2 where Steve finds a lump, but there's a twist. It's not a tumor, it's a chest burster. This is why we only visit Imperial sanctioned hot pot restaurants, Steve. So yeah, there's a point to all of this. Plot armor keeps you alive and from dying in very stupid ways. Luke Skywalker was saved by the Jedi Child Protective Services from an abusive childhood. Actually, I would totally watch Anakin versus ObiWan Kenobi on Springer in a child custody battle. For those of you youngins who don't know what Jerry Springer is, it's basically like Fortnite Battle Royale, but with real people. Also, Anakin has to be the burnt version of Anakin, because that'd be funnier. But yeah, Luke Skywalker was so close to becoming royalty on Alderaan, but Yoda chooses to send him to the backwards planet of Tatooine, which is basically like sending a kid to the Saharan desert. Life consists of straining moisture out of the air for survival and boredom 99% of the time. The other 1% of the time you have to try to avoid religious fanatics who worship water and want to kill you. Thank God the Tusken Raiders don't have access to Toyota pickup trucks on Tatooine. It's truly a miracle that Luke Skywalker survived as long as he did. I'd argue it'd almost be better if his real father raised him. Sure, one of the first time they meet, Vader does cut his hand off with a laser sword, but we used to call that good parenting and discipline. Anyway, if it wasn't for ObiWan Kenobi, Luke probably would have died before the age of 5. The Skywalker farm was constantly under attack by thugs and Tusken Raiders. At the age of 8, when Luke was finally old enough to do something truly stupid all by himself, he tries to stop a bunch of Jabba the Hutt's water tax collectors in the middle of the night in the middle of nowhere. He should have died or at least been captured and sold to slavery, but instead, he gets knocked out and Obi-Wan Kenobi again manages to save the day. Luke Skywalker was then saved at the age of 12 from being eaten by a crate dragon, again by Obi-Wan Kenobi. He also falls off a cliff into a cave when he's rock climbing, and he's crashed his T-16 Skyhopper more than a few times. It's no surprise that Luke eventually becomes a courageous hero for the rebellion. One can only be that fearless when they've cheated death so many times. Princess Leia lives a much more privileged lifestyle than Luke Skywalker. Pampered and well-educated, the young princess still had a very rebellious streak that it seems all Skywalkers inherit. But she was constantly guarded by her loving royal Alderaanian family, and rarely exposed to the type of dangers that Luke was exposed to on a daily basis. Leia joined the rebellion early on, using her role as a junior legislator and then as her father's aide to secretly help the rebel cause. Leia would eventually become the representative for Alderaan in the Senate and became involved with the terrorist organization known as the Rebel Alliance. She opened fire during a very routine traffic stop of her Corvette. Luckily, the stormtroopers who apprehended her were very well trained and disciplined and used stun rounds to take her down. Had she been a Wookiee or God forbid a Twi'lek, they most likely would have used lethal rounds, and that would have been the end of her story. I guess that's the privilege of being a princess surrounded by plot armor. It's rumored that Han Solo came from Corellian royalty, but his father was pretty average. He actually worked in the Corellian Engineering Corporation factory, and he basically built YT-1300 freighters. That's what the Millennium Falcon is. After he died, Han Solo basically became a street urchin, which is a terrible life. While the White Worms weren't the worst outfit that he could join, they still were monstrous subterranean worms who lived in the sewers under a landfill. Han Solo would get involved in all sorts of illegal activities, and from an early age, he developed the bad habit of relying solely on his instincts and not on his brain. This got him into constant trouble, but luckily, his friend Kira was always looking out for him. Without her, he probably would have died in one gang-related incident or another. He always found himself running away from angry thugs wielding blasters, and without plot armor, Han Solo most likely would have become just another Cornet City gang violence statistic. He somehow does manage to escape from Corellia and makes it to the Imperial Navy. He once again survives some very close calls, including some pretty devastating high-speed crashes. Han gets kicked out of the Imperial Navy and becomes an Imperial mud jumper during the Battle of Mimban, one of the most dangerous theaters to fight in the galaxy. But once again, plot armor protects him. I mean, look at just how far he flies from this explosion. A shockwave that can throw your body that far will scramble your insides. There's no way he could have survived this without plot armor. ObiWan Kenobi was a powerful Force user who made it through the traditional Jedi training pipeline. This made him a very capable and formidable fighter. But as we saw during the arena battle of Geonosis, not even a Jedi can withstand overwhelming blaster fire without some decent plot armor. When he was a Padawan, ObiWan Kenobi goes with Qui-Gon Jinn on a mission to Mandalore to protect local leader Duchess Satine Kryze. While on Mandalore, the Duchess and the Jedi are constantly on the run and outnumbered by a large group of Mandalorian bounty hunters who are trying to kill them. It's hard enough to survive a fight with a Mandalorian bounty hunter on a normal day. They basically train their entire lives to become efficient killers, with a significant focus on killing Jedi. And if you think that's bad, imagine trying to survive these Mandalorian bounty hunters while simultaneously protecting someone you love. It's not that easy to do, but I will give ObiWan Kenobi the benefit of the doubt here because he is a top-tier Jedi. But where I draw the line is his duel against the very seasoned Darth Maul. The Sith assassin was very skilled with the lightsaber, and he had the victory sealed, and he basically pulled a Deshaun Jackson. And then he just lets ObiWan Kenobi slice him in half after he lets him jump right over him. Maul had a lightsaber in his hand, why doesn't he just slice the young Padawan in half? You're not supposed to lose when you have the high ground. No wonder Maul basically spends the next decade or two trying to find ObiWan Kenobi and get his revenge. Maul is definitely sore about this entire situation, and he kind of seems like the individual who might go on the forums and complain that ObiWan Kenobi is a hacker and using glitches, but in reality, ObiWan Kenobi just has plot armor. As the Chosen One, Anakin had an immense amount of Force power, but almost zero awareness of it at a young age. It did naturally make him an excellent pilot, and gave him heightened reflexes. The fact that he was able to survive the entire pod race and win is impressive. A bit of plot armor probably helped him survive. I mean, those Tusken Raiders were using the track as target practice. But things get really ridiculous when he decides to hide in a Naboo starfighter, which basically flies him up into orbit. The whole time it's an autopilot and it just flies in a straight line. But somehow none of the droids or none of the weapons emplacements on the droid control ship manages to get a beat on him. This battle was already one-sided enough. For each Naboo fighter, there were easily a few dozen enemy fighters. The fact that Anakin was not shot down immediately when he didn't even have control of the ship is a heavy indication that plot armor is surrounding him. This guy didn't need plot armor. He was a Sith Lord and a master tactician and skilled fighter. Everything he does is completely believable. Padme Amidala was a commoner, but she was extremely gifted and smart for her age. She became queen at the age of 14 and ended up getting caught in numerous firefights with battle droids during the Naboo invasion. Unlike Princess Leia, she wasn't trained in combat techniques but still survived many of these engagements. She was quite a brave individual and led her royal guard from the front, but also needlessly exposed herself to enemy fire several times. It's a miracle she wasn't gunned down. But what's even more miraculous was how she was able to survive the arena battle of Geonosis. It's impressive enough that she manages to fight off a giant monster, but how is she able to survive the crossfire of hundreds of droids when almost all of the Jedi who came to her rescue didn't? Out of the 213 Jedi who entered the arena, 179 died. Padme wasn't Force sensitive. She also didn't have a lightsaber or shield that could block incoming rounds. Even Anakin, who tried his best to protect her, could only protect incoming rounds from one side. Plus, she spends half the battle flying around in a chariot, which isn't exactly low-key or taking cover. This is a great example of plot armor. But ultimately, that plot armor ends up leaving her and she dies from a heart explosion. Rey was a relatively skilled individual by the time we were introduced to her, when she wasn't spending her time rappelling into massive caverns of dead Star Destroyers for scrap. She was at home in her derelict AT-AT running through combat flight simulators. Maybe it was good enough for her to learn how to fly the Millennium Falcon and escape those First Order TIE fighters. Maybe. I mean, she clearly is very powerful, and that does help when it comes to piloting. But I'd argue it's quite difficult to learn how to fly a ship without prior experience at the controls of that ship. That's why airline pilots have to certify with specific aircraft. But I'll give her a pass on this. After all, she is flying the Millennium Falcon. The thing is the Star Wars equivalent of a boosted minivan. It's a sleeper, and it loves blowing the Star Wars equivalent of Honda Civics with fart cans off the line. But what really becomes quite unbelievable is her duel with Kylo Ren later on in the film. While Kylo Ren is no Vader, he was a pretty well-trained Jedi and incredibly powerful in the Force. The guy was able to stop blaster projectiles in midair, something that was pretty difficult to do. Even though Rey does have some stab fighting abilities, I don't really think it translates well into lightsaber combat. Even Luke Skywalker, who was arguably as powerful as Rey when he encountered Darth Vader, had some serious trouble fighting a much more experienced Force wielder. At a minimum, she should have lost her arm or her leg, which is basically the accepted rite of passage in the Star Wars galaxy. You're almost a bad person if you manage to make it through your first movie with your limbs intact. It makes people suspicious. Chewbacca, like many Wookiees, could live to a very long age. He fought for Kashyyyk during the Clone Wars against the Separatists, and then later against the Empire. He eventually teamed up with Han Solo, and together the two would become one of the most famous interspecies platonic couples the galaxy has ever seen. While we all love Chewie, there is one problem with his constant survival, and a clear indication that he is heavily protected by a plot armor. At 7'5", he is a huge target, and he shouldn't be able to take cover in most situations. And let's be honest, if you're in a firefight and facing a Wookiee and some humans, you're going to shoot the Wookiee first, especially the one who's holding a giant ballista in his hand. Chewie, however, was smart enough to realize that if he ran with Han Solo, not only would the roguish smuggler provide him with a stable job, he would also provide him with some very thick plot armor. So as you can see, without plot armor, the Star Wars saga would be pretty boring and probably end pretty quickly. Although I am very curious about what happens to Steve, the Death Star technician. Let me know in the comment section below what you think. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.